David, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
We are joking around, putting our Batman mask on and goggles and recording this in my son's room.
Yeah, that's quite funny.
Bit different, novel. Speaking of novel, this topic is something we haven't spoken about on the podcast before, but it's something that is spoken about virtually everywhere. And you would know this unless you've been living in a cave or off-grid or I don't know what. And that topic is artificial intelligence. Now, David, for those of you who don't know, is my husband, and he writes on these very subjects, well, predominantly novels, but is now venturing into his first non-fiction self-development type book. And today we wanted to share about why, in his view, self-development is more important than ever before in this era of AI. So, David, I'm curious to start with this. Like, what is your take on all of this kind of fear mongering out there around like AI is going to take over the world, or we are going to be kicked out of our jobs, they're not going to exist anymore, and we should be afraid of that?
I mean, I can see why people are afraid. And I think Mogada, who is a former ex-CEO of Google X, said that within 20 years, artificial intelligence will be 1 billion times smarter than us. So that's quite scary, isn't it? Can you imagine someone or a machine being 1 billion times more intelligent than us? But when I heard that, I was like, yeah, but in reality, what is intelligent? What kind of intelligence are we speaking about here? Because if it's kind of processing intelligence, that's almost already there. I mean, computers are able to process a lot of data that our brain doesn't have the capability to do. Well, I reckon artificial intelligence will go much further than that. But to which extent will artificial intelligence reach the complexity of our own human intelligence? That's a question mark. And I just think that, like with every novelty, there's a lot of fear around it.
Yeah, that is true. That is true for sure. So what is it you think for you that has led you to have more of a like favorable view of this?
Well, the first thing is that I don't think people developing artificial intelligence have totally understood what a human being is. So they are trying to replicate something that is more like our brain without really considering that we are significantly more than just our brain. And I guess we're going to come back to that in this podcast. But so the fact that artificial intelligence is developed to replicate our brain makes me hopeful that it will just be kind of a super brain and not a human.
Which leads to a very important question, which is that of what actually makes us human and different, therefore, to AI. So I decided to ask Chat GPT this because, isn't that what everyone is doing? Everyone is doing these days.
And why not?
Yeah,
that's on topic.
That's it. So I'm like, treating Chat GPT as my kind of personal assistant or the person to get me unstuck when I don't know what to do or whatever. But I said, so dear Chat GPT, what do humans have that AI will never be able to have? Just seeing testing how much ego they've got, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But they said that there are a few things that humans possess that it would be really difficult for AI to fully replicate. So I'm curious your take on this, David, because I know you come onto the stuff around consciousness and the wider field of consciousness that you don't think they have access to. So we'll come to that. But what they say is that they would find it difficult to replicate emotional intelligence.
Yes.
Recognizing emotions, displaying empathy, forming meaningful interpersonal connections, creativity. They can generate novel content, but only based on the patterns that are learned, like the data that is inputted into it. But creating anything novel is difficult. There's quite a few more, like flexibility, subjective experience, humor, and wit. Don't know if anyone's tried to get AI to tell you a joke, but they are SHIT. And the other thing which you speak about is intuition. Mm-hmm. Without explaining what it was, they said, okay, humans possess a form of common sense and intuition that allows them to make sense of situations even when information that we would consider with our prefrontal cortex is ambiguous or incomplete. I found it really interesting that they mention that, because this is really what you treat in your latest book, right?
Yeah, exactly. In my latest book, I'm more referring about how human will keep their job, because I think this is one of the main fear I hear around. Maybe just a step back. Why do I hear that around? Is because my latest novel is trying to put together a shaman, so a human who has full access to the potential of his humanity or his consciousness, versus an artificial intelligence who doesn't have consciousness but is kind of envious of human who have that consciousness, and therefore she wants to learn from the shaman in order to really experience what consciousness is. And that's the theme of my latest novel. And then when I give conferences on this subject, people come and they keep asking me that question: what makes us different than artificial intelligence? And it's true that from what you mentioned, there is intuition, there is innovation, and there is creativity. And these are the three things that I think will make people very different than artificial intelligences in the workspace. Mm-hmm. And therefore, yes, when people say, well, I fear that artificial intelligence is going to replace us and we're going to become obsolete, at least on the workplace, I'm like, yeah, really? But then who's going to do that? Who's going to have the intuition? Who's going to have the real innovation and the creativity?
Because I guess the fear is, in the context of a takeover, it's the idea that artificial intelligence is going to become so intelligent that they control us rather than humans remaining at the top of this, being the ones that input the data and use artificial intelligence as a tool to ameliorate our lives.
Yeah, I guess the fear is who will be ultimately in control. Like, who will be your boss if we don't go to a scenario like a science fiction movie or Terminator, where artificial intelligences could be working against human, and then there would be a war. I guess let's leave that to science fiction scenarios or Hollywood. Yeah. But a more reasonable fear is who's going to have the control. Who's going to be my boss? Because if I have to report to an artificial intelligence, then my job might not be that fun anymore. Or if I am replaced if I become obsolete and then I'm unemployed because, I don't know, I'm a graphics designer and now Midjourney does that much better and faster than me. So what is my worth? Am I just obsolete and then I'm going to be unemployed all of my life unless I change up? But if I change up, what kind of job can I do that will not be replaced by artificial intelligence? So that's kind of I would say, a more concrete fear than these science fiction based scenarios.
Mm-hmm. Develop that a little bit more in terms of your views of what could change in the workplace, like in a positive way.
I think we do have a problem in the workplace in the sense that we know that especially in big organizations, work-life balance is very, very difficult to achieve. And not achieving work-life balance makes it very difficult for people to be self-aware and to go on the personal development path. We're going to come back to that, but there's the thinking process, the number of thoughts we generate every day, that is very important into that. But if you are stressed, if you have to work long hours, if you have pressure from your clients, from your management, you are going to be in a state of mind that is going to be very difficult for you to tap into your true self. And I think that's a society problem nowadays, that as human beings, we are really kind of pressurized to produce. So in a positive way, artificial intelligences could help the whole economical work world to still produce as much, if not more, than they do nowadays, but with less hours and less pressure put onto employees. That's a possible scenario. I'm sure you can imagine some worse scenario where companies want to maximize profit and would just lay off people. But in a positive, an optimistic way of seeing things, there's the opportunity to have a real change, almost a change of paradigm in the workplace with artificial intelligence used wisely.
Yeah. So let's come to this topic, which you've treated a lot in your novels and in this too, which is that of consciousness, and what, in your view, humans have that artificial intelligence will never have access to. Because your views on this are not what is usually read about in mainstream media, heard about in, the most popular podcasts.
Yes, well, absolutely. And so we said we would come back to this when we spoke earlier about the fact that the machine are replicating our brain. And you know that I have done more than 30 years of research in what is called noetic sciences, and those are the science of consciousness. So after so many years of research, and I must specify that this is research, so it's not beliefs. It's really trying to have testimonials of people who are able to access another state of consciousness, such as near-death experience or out-of-body experience or enlightenment, but more like with brain scans, with a lot of data processing, in the sense of we record a lot of testimonials and we then see if what people tell us is identical and where we find patterns and everything. So just as a precision, it's studying consciousness, but with scientific tools. And what I've learned after these 30 years of doing so is that I think I can summarize it, and also to simplify, because consciousness is probably one of the most difficult problem that science is facing with, probably with understanding the birth of the universe and everything, but it's super complicated.
Side note, everyone, I've asked David to probably explain what is consciousness to me at least 100 times, and every time I'm left going, honey, I still don't understand. I'm still as confused as ever. Can you just simplify this for me, please?
Exactly.
So, yeah.
So I've tried many times, but I think a good simplification we can do is say that consciousness is something dual, because we are conscious through our brain. So the activity that our brain generates bring us a kind of consciousness that I called our mind. The first element is that we are conscious, that we are awake versus asleep, so the state of consciousness. And then it's more, we have recorded information since our childhood, like our identity, what we like, what we don't like, our experiences, what we are good at, what we are not good at, our personality. A lot of that is something that has just been processed by the supercomputer that our brain is. And therefore, our sense of identity comes from there. But what we know less is that consciousness is also something that is not generated by our brain. There is kind of something bigger, and I probably don't want to go into all the details of that because that's when it becomes complicated. But when people talk about spirit or soul, they in fact refer to something that is a sort of consciousness that it is external to us. And then our body is able to receive and exchange information with that wider consciousness, like a cell phone is able to connect to the internet. So that is in reality what we are. We have our mind that is that is consciousness self-generated by our brain, but we are also able to access to a wilder field of consciousness, much wider field of consciousness. And I think this is what makes us human and unique. And the machine will probably only have the mind capabilities. So when I answer to people who have fear of being obsolete because of the rise of artificial intelligence, I'm telling them, yes, you might become obsolete if you keep on focusing on your mind intelligence only. But if you start trying to tap into your wider field of consciousness, then I doubt that a machine will ever be able to do that. Mm-hmm. And that wider field of consciousness, I think one of the way to describe how we receive this information that speaks to everyone is intuitions. Mm-hmm. Suddenly you receive an intuition. Sometimes it's even, I don't know if you have had intuition about the future, but otherwise I could give you a few examples. But when you receive an intuition about the future, it's quite unique because the future is not supposed to be known, but you receive that intuition and then you have a guess into what's going to happen and you can decide whether you want to change it or not. That's what I mean by tapping into this wider field of consciousness. You can even have premonitions, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Tell the story about this guy in Lyon, the friend who you went out with in Geneva, and
Oh, yes, yeah. Well, he's a journalist, and he was interviewing me about The Shaman du Pacific, which is my latest novel. And at the end of the interview, off record, he said, "What are you writing on today?" And I'm saying, well, my next book will not be a novel. It will be that book we're speaking about now, which is how to be the most human when machine becomes intelligent. And I said, and part of it is what you receive from that wider field of consciousness, including intuition. And he said, "Oh, it's funny you tell me about that, because something happened to me yesterday and I don't know what to make of it." And then he started to explain to me. He said, I was going to a meeting in Lyon, so I took my car and I was really just in time and I didn't find a parking space. So I was turning around and around without finding a parking space. And then suddenly, right before the place where I had the meeting, someone left. So the place was for me. So I considered myself lucky. I started to park. And then I heard this distinct voice in my head, not this one. And I paused and I thought about it. I said, why not this one? This is the perfect one. And I'm late to my meeting. And then I parked. I went to my meeting. And then he said, well, you'll never believe what happened after. But I was like, yes, something happened. I'm sure that was a real intuition. In reality, when he came back, one of his window has been broken and someone rubbed his car. And then he said, what was that? I mean, what was that voice telling me in advance that my car would be rubbed? And I said, well, that's exactly what it is to connect to the wider field of consciousness. You get information that your mind, your brain could never generate. So that's something special.
So this is the home of our intuition, our creativity, where we can innovate. I know you've said one example in your book is like imagining how many thousands of books are published every year. Something like 80,000?
Well, in France alone, there is 80,000 books published every year.
And you said the idea of like how we come up with a novel idea, something new. Mm-hmm. Explain that a little bit, because I was like, that is so true.
Well, I'm a novelist, and I have to come up with an idea whenever I want to write a novel. And it has to be original. I mean, I cannot write a novel on something that has already been written on. At least that's not how I view my fiction writer job. So I usually have to apply the techniques that I teach in this book about how to tap to this wider field of consciousness, to have creative, innovative, or intuitive information in order to get it. Because there's no way I will find an original story Googling. Because if I Google and I find it, that's usually when I don't use it, because it means that the story has already been taken. So if I really want to innovate and truly innovate, I cannot ask Chat GPT, I cannot ask Google, I cannot go into a library and make a kind of look at all the book and say, oh, maybe I'm going to copy this one. So I really have to put myself in a situation where I will receive an information, and it has to come in form of an intuition onto what the theme of my book will be. And I think in the manuscript that you read, because you are very lucky here, it's the first ever talk I do for a book that is not published yet. But my loving wife decided to read the manuscript, and I think you liked it so much that you wanted to do this podcast today. So we are, in fact, talking about a book that is not published, but will be published in January. But what I'm telling in this book is that I once tried to write something without this intuition. And I think I was a bit pressured by the fact that my second novel had been a bestseller in the French-speaking area. And I had signed with a very famous paperback publisher a contract. And that was a big deal because they would do the paperback version of that very successful book, that they would floor all the French-speaking country with it. You would find it in the train station and everywhere. But the contract said that I had to publish my third novel at the same time as they would do that. So for the first time, I had pressure on when I had a deadline on when I had to write my novel. So I think because of that, I wasn't careful enough to wait for the right intuition, and I started to write my novel. And I was not super satisfied with the story, but it was a good story, so I kept on going. I had written a third of that novel, and I suddenly got an image about a monk that said to one of my main characters, I am a specialist in quantum archaeology. And then I paused and I said, what is this thing? It has nothing to do with the rest of my book. But quantum archaeology, that's a nice name. What could it be? And
you didn't even know what that was?
No, I didn't know.
Okay, good, because I don't know who has those random thoughts about a monk and quantum archaeology. But
no, I didn't know what that was. The only thing I knew is that when we said we tap into this wider field of information, and there are some scientific work, namely from Erwin Laszlo, who has been nominated twice for the Nobel Prize, who says that the universe is a field of information. And part of this information is the memory of the universe. And ancient wisdom called that the Akashic field. So I was kind of, okay, well, if quantum archaeology must be related to that, and doing quantum archaeology is probably opening the Akashic memories to know about previous civilization. And then the next day, and I'm not lying, but I was still ruminating what is this quantum archaeology could mean. I go for a massage, and I knew that the person who does the massage is quite intuitive. And at the end of the massage, I could see that she was pretty shy and wanted to tell me something. She was like, I got an image. I don't know. It's going to seem very weird, but I think I have to tell it to you. When I was doing the massage, I saw an image of Atlantid. And I was like, oh, that's weird. Atlantid, or Atlantis, you say?
Atlantis.
That the supposed civilization.
That's underwater.
That's
that
underwater.
Doesn't exist anymore.
It doesn't exist anymore. And I said, well, that's two coincidences in today. Quantum archaeology, and then, so it's about ancient civilization, and then this intuitive masseur who tells me about Atlantid. And then I said, well, I'm going to make it short, but I said, this is a real theme for a great novel, but it's not what I've written so far. So the last 4 months, I've written on another theme that is not as great as this one. And then for 3 or 4 days, I tried to see how I could make a 90 degrees turn without losing what I already...
Yeah, the sunk cost of it
exactly,
all.
Yeah. And no, it was impossible. So I had to start from scratch. So now I know for sure that if I do not tap into my intuitions, I will just lose my time writing, because it has to come from that place.
I think it's an interesting point, because you mentioned there at the start about how you were essentially blocked through stress.
Yes.
And the fact that that is also what is prohibiting us from us, as in you listening, me, everyone else, from accessing this wider field of information, because we presumably can't if we are in a stress state.
Absolutely, yes. Because what is the core of the method that I describe in my upcoming book about accessing this wider field of consciousness, which machine will never be able to do. So that's kind of keeping our difference, keeping our humanity versus the machines, is how to do it. Because it's true when I talk to people and I say, well, machine will become super intelligent, but we are more than that. Think about all your intuition and all your innovative and creative side. People say, well, I don't really access that. And in reality, the reason why is that because our mind is overactive. Mm-hmm. And if you think that we are dual, we have our mind and this wider field of consciousness, I think you have to think that our mind is at the forefront and it's louder, and the wider field of consciousness will be some whispered information. And therefore, if you don't make space to into your mind, it's very difficult to listen to the whispers that comes from that wider field of consciousness.
I love that.
And that's what it is. And what is the product of our mind that is so loud? It's our thoughts. We know that we have about 30,000 thoughts a day. 80% of it is repetitive. So we are rumbling and rumbling and rumbling. And while we are rumbling, we have this really wise information that is lost. It's there, but it's not listened to. So a big part of what I'm saying in this book is, or what I'm teaching in this book, and I'm not inventing anything, it's things that exist, but I'm just putting them together, is, okay, make space on your thoughts, at least maybe once or twice a day, so that you can listen to these whispers. And then to really answer the core of your question, what is the main thing that generates thoughts? It's anxiety. I mean, excessive thoughts, it's anxiety. As soon as you become stressed, anxious, it's like you're really pushing the gas pedal of thinking. And therefore, that's why the only time that I really had a deadline for a book, I think it's my mind who decided to go for it instead of the whole of my personality, which is my mind, but also my wider consciousness. And it was not good enough because my mind is not creative enough to be able to write a great novel.
Yeah. I think it's really important what you share there, because it also reflects not only the importance of us being able to be more creative and listen more to our intuitions, be more innovative in what we do, both in our personal and professional lives, but also that sense of grounded inner peace that so many of us are looking for, like generally living our life in a happier, more balanced state on the day to day. But I really want to paint this picture of why it is so important to follow this path. And I'd love for you, David, to share a little bit about maybe your own example of what even led you into writing and how that was different than what you were doing before.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the why it is important to us, and it will be reflected in that story that I'm going to share with you in a second, is that it not only it will make us different, and I think always superior to the machines because we tap into this gigantic field of information, but in addition to that, it will lead us into the right path. I mean, into what passion us, what we enjoy doing. And that's the example that I can share with you. So all of my career, I've been an executive, I've been a CEO. Basically, I own a company, multinational companies in consumer behavior. And I was doing research for economical purposes. The research around consciousness was just my passion. And as I was gathering information and knowledge on consciousness, more and more people started to tell me, wow, what you have discovered or what you have put together, because I don't think I have discovered anything, what you have put together is quite something that needs to be shared. Why don't you write a book? And the first time I've heard that, I was like, yeah, you're joking. But after the 20th time and from renowned scientists, I was like, yeah, there's maybe something into that. And then, I started to write a book. I wanted it to be a serious book that was explaining all or summarizing my at that time it was 25 plus years of research on the subject. And I wrote it, and it was very tedious. I mean, I could see that I was not a writer. I could see that I was struggling. I was spending a lot of time. I was mixing that with my CEO job and everything. So that it was way... So halfway through, as I was reading what I wrote, I was like, no, this won't cut it. It's not good enough, and it's too tedious. And I said, this was really a bad idea. I just lost my time. Also, as I was learning about consciousness, I was also starting to practice it. And I read the book Eckhart Tolle. I think Eckhart is
that everyone mentions on
exactly.
this podcast if you've been listening for a while. Power of Now.
And I when I read The Power of Now, I said, and that never happened with any other book I've read, but I suddenly wanted to know more and do more about what Eckhart Tolle was teaching. So I Googled his name, and I saw that he was giving a retreat in New York. I was living in Vevey, so in Switzerland, but I decided, well, let's try. And funnily enough, you couldn't register online. There was just a phone number, so I called and I registered. And then
this is the boldness of a chief executive, by the way, everyone, that I think we should just adopt for anyone who's there like, oh, I have this passion that I might want to pursue. Oh no, the doors are closed. You barge your way through them.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of unexpected, because I was reading about Googling. There was a phone number. I called. I got a nice human being and not a machine on the line, and yeah, I just did it. And then I went, and when I went there, something, of course, Eckhart Tolle teach us how to space our thoughts, how to think less. So I kind of applied what I'm proposing in this book. And it worked, because suddenly at a lunch break, I decided to go on the lake. They had a little lake. The surrounding of this conference or retreat were very beautiful, and it was autumn and with red and yellow everywhere. So I went in this beautiful lake.
It was the state of New York, right? It wasn't New York City.
No, it was not in the city.
Centre Manhattan, Times Square or something for a nice calm retreat.
No, I had to drive 2 hours up north. So it was really in the countryside, and it was beautiful, sunny day. And I started to almost fall asleep, have a little nap on this boat. And suddenly I really had the intuition, because it was clear and it was loud, loud for once. This whisper, I could hear it, it was saying me, you should write, but write novel. It's more fun.
Did you experience this as your own voice? How was that? Because I think this is the question that I hear asked all the time about people knowing what it is to experience an intuition and being like, I don't know if it's my voice talking to me, if it's just a felt sense rather than words.
I don't think it was a voice. I think it was an idea, but it had a different taste. Yeah. And because I was really practicing on not having too many thoughts, I think I could hear that and feel it. And it felt not only on my brain, it felt also on my belly and on my heart. And then, I had kind of a surge of joy and energy. Yeah. And I was kind of falling asleep. But at the same time, as soon as I got this intuition, I was completely awake and completely energetic. And I took the boat back to shore, opened my computer, and I decided to write the first chapter. I really wanted to try this idea right away. Not let my brain, because I think my brain could have easily put that idea away, resonate it. Okay, you have already tried. You have much better things to do. You have a company to manage. Book ideas, we've.
Yeah, who are you? You're exactly. Executive. You're not a creative author. What is this? Yeah.
So before my brain could do that, I decided to open my computer and to write my first chapter. And then the experience was totally different. And it's funny because it's writing a book, so it's not so different than what I tried before that was tedious. But writing a novel was very different because I suddenly went into a state of flow where I could see images of my story and I had to describe them. And describing them made a very, very intuitive and original story that then made a book that was worth publishing and that opened my novelist career. So that's the story. In reality, I was an executive. I was researching on consciousness. I knew I had to share about those findings on consciousness, but I could never have imagined that it was through novel because I didn't think I had that in me. But when I had this intuition and I acted on this intuition, that's when I realized that I could go into a state of flow where writing novel was a very, very easy and pleasant and joyful task.
Yeah, beautiful. And I love that you break that down with flow, because I think it's something that we all need to start paying more attention to, which is our own energetic experience of something, like what lights us up, what brings us joy, because I think in this time conscious world where we think we have our tasks every day, our to-do list, we must be productive. And there carries an underlying sense of stress and anxiety about what we need to do. Whereas it's ironic, because I think of your example and it's like, but how quickly that came to you. You know, you had this intuition. You felt that there was something different about it, but you also had the courage to act on it and start putting that into practice. You think like the time that it took you to write that novel. I mean, David just writes novels. I'm just envious. I'm like, please, I have no way that I've accessed any part of this flow, but I see him writing. It's just mental. But like the fact that you did that, you could also think, what is the lost time in essence when you were still chucking around all these ideas with just your mind?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big difference. And you witnessed that, but also a lot of people, including my publisher, they wonder how I can write novels so fast. But in reality, it's just because I access this wider field of consciousness and it's there. So I just have to let it flow.
Yes.
So there's no effort. And that's when I think that's
I'm sold. No effort. Okay. No effort.
Well, no, it's a lie because there is an effort, but there's no effort to get the story out. The effort is more on when I go back to my mind, because I cannot only make a novel out of the intuition or the creativity that I receive from this wider field of consciousness. That's the raw material, and my mind has to then use that raw material to chapter it, to make a story that makes sense and everything. So there's a lot of back and forth. I like to call it a fruitful collaboration between these two parts of our consciousness, my mind and the wider field of consciousness. And it's true that when I do it through my mind, especially toward the end, when I have to reread everything and correct, and that's when the effort comes in. I usually write over 400 pages, and then I have to correct all this, and I reread it usually up to 8 times. So that's kind of tedious. So I'm not saying that by accessing the wider field of consciousness, you're going to have everything easy, but you're going to have it much easier because what you get is very valuable. And then you use your mind to make it tangible, you know?
Yeah, and to give birth to it in the real world.
Exactly,
like
in
to
the real
materialize
world.
it, because otherwise it's experienced as like an inner experience or
Exactly.
a thought even of us in ways.
Exactly.
But actually we need to make it tangible.
Yes. And I think in that manuscript that you read, I say somewhere why I think an artificial intelligence will never be able to write those kind of novels, because it's about 70-30. It's 70% of intuitions and innovation and creativity, so connecting to the wider field of consciousness, and it's 30% of mind energy and mind work. So even if those 30% are quite tedious, I think that's the only part that maybe one day I could give to an artificial intelligence. But the 70% where I have to get the story out of the wider field of consciousness, I don't see a machine doing that anytime soon.
So this goes back to what we said at the very start about, why is self-development even more critical now in this era of AI? And this is part of it, right?
It's what it is. Because now if I try to write a novel 100% with my mind, I think that there I will write a novel that a machine, maybe not today, but in 2 years or 3 years' time, will be able to write. And it will be able to write it in one day, whereas I probably need 4 or 5 months. So I'm obsolete.
Yeah.
And I think this. I'm talking about novel because that's my job. But for your job, for any kind of job, or it could be any kind of information. It could also be something personal, about personal relationship, about who to associate with, or who to become friend with, or who to have as your partner. All these things can be much, much easier if you use your intuitions.
Yeah. Let's go with that in mind. Let's go a little bit on to the method of this. So you have a model that you break down, and I want to break it down for everyone listening to so that they can have some practical strategies to take away with them about how they can start implementing this in their everyday life. And you start with something that you called mind stretching. So I've got this visual here of like yoga for the mind, which works better for you because you suck at yoga. I'm trying
Yes.
everyone in real life yoga. David is less than wonderful. Sorry, darling. But mind yoga, you smashed it. So let's break this down.
Yeah, for me, the methods start with, I think there's a lot of spiritual books who wants to jump directly into connecting to this wider field of consciousness. And they say, the enemy is your ego. So let's get rid of your ego. And I think ego is very close to what I call the mind consciousness. And I don't think that's the right way to do it, because you don't want to kill your ego. You don't want to kill your mind. It's your sense of identity. It's something very important. We need it. And
so what is this? I mean, just to break this down even more, when we say ego, this is like the voice in your head, right? This is the voice that tells you, I am Shannon Jenkins, I'm 30 years old, I like this, I dislike that, blah, blah, blah.
Yes, and it's also the voice in your head that does the planning, I should be going to work. I have this deadline that I should be aware of. I need to split my time in this way and not that way. So I think if you completely let go of that, you become completely in the wild field of consciousness. But as you said before, and that's what we also talked about with my novel, if I don't bring my mind into it, then it's a vague thought and it remains in the kind of a dream,
the
abstract thing. So you need both. The problem we have is that your mind now is usually doing 95% of the work, and we leave almost nothing to that wider consciousness. But we don't want to kill it. We want to stretch it. We want it to be a bit more aware of its limitation. We want it to be aware of the barrier that it puts into our self-development. I very much like the idea of saying, okay, well, your mind is generating thoughts. The thoughts are this voice in your head. You think you are this voice in your head, but in reality, it's part of you, but it's not the only part of you. But the more this voice in your head is taking space, and the less you see of other things. So I like to compare our thoughts to sheep in a field. So if there is a lot of sheep and a fence around them, you can see the image of kind of a place where you don't even see the ground that is around the sheep. And that the state of mind that is not stretched. So it's the sheep are shoulder to shoulder and there's no space. Whereas if you imagine instead, I don't know, the landscape of Scotland or New Zealand, where you have a lot of greeneries, and then you see this black and white spot, those are sheep that are spread around. There is a lot of space and you see the greenery. And the stretching of the mind is exactly that, is making space into your thoughts so that you can receive this information.
Is it making space between your thoughts, or is it having different thoughts?
It's both. It's both. You know why? Because if you make If you make space, then you can have this whispered information access you. But at the same time, negative thoughts are stressful.
Yes.
So if you replace negative thoughts with more positive thoughts, you reduce the stress level. And then you kill one bird with two stones, in the sense that by reducing the stress level, you also reduce the number of thoughts. So you start to have more positive thoughts and less of them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what I want to do with this mind stretching. Yeah. And then I guess your next question is how to achieve that. So how to make the fence much, 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 much larger, so that your thoughts have space. And I like to see the fences are, for me, the fences is in reality a representation of our beliefs. And I think that's what is important. Stretching, mind stretching is above all, trying to have less limiting beliefs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because you explore this both from like the collective and the individual, right? And just for us to become more aware of that. So you say there might be some collective beliefs based on the cultural, social system that we grew up in. Like, I must work really hard to earn money, or I can't trust everyone. The world is a dangerous place. Like, what is it what system that you have had inculcated into you? And then we also have our personal ones. And like something that I've noticed even amongst like the limiting beliefs is that you can almost categorize your thoughts. So going back to what you said about between the 6,000 to 60,000, research is a bit unclear, but an enormous amount of thoughts every day. And yet they're not wildly variant, right? Like you said, they're repetitive. So you often have a kind of category that they can fit into. And that goes towards some of the underlying fears that we have. So when we speak about, self-developing, this is part of it, right? It's to access the freedom, to expand open, to reduce our stress, to reduce our anxiety and feel more at peace. Because when you realize, okay, I've been turning these thoughts around of like, I can't do that author, I can't be an author because I am not a creative person, etc.
Yeah, I think beliefs have, that's why in the method that I propose, mind stretching comes first, because I think beliefs have two negative effects. The first one is that they are limiting. So if you, for example, if you are a pure materialistic scientist and you're not aware about the latest research on consciousness, and you don't even consider that you could receive information such as intuition that do not come from your brain, then how can you access it?
Yeah, or how are you going to listen to it?
How are you going to listen to it? So I think, and same if you have a strong religious upbringing or something that really make anything that is out of that way of thinking, then is not possible for you. So you're limiting yourself, because at the end of the day, you are what you think. So what you cannot think about is something that you will never access. So that's one of the reasons. The second reason is that a lot of our thoughts are fear-based. So because you have limiting beliefs, because you think you cannot do this, because you think you are such and such, or I don't know, you think you are not good looking enough, and then you develop a complex around it, then that is going to fill up your stream of thoughts.
Exactly. So that's what we've got there for the first step about like the mind stretching, our yoga for the mind, examining our collective beliefs, our limiting beliefs. Second step, you talk about training. What's involved in this?
Training is then really going into the core of listening to your wider consciousness. And that means being able to listen to that whispers. And that means being able to space your thoughts. So if you have done the mind stretching, it becomes easier because you have less thoughts and they are less frantic and they are less obsessive. But then it's also being able to give yourself time and space to welcome these intuitions. A lot of people will jump into meditation because meditation, if you do it correctly, is probably the perfect tool, because during 10, 15, 20 minutes, you are going to let go of your thoughts as much as possible. And that's usually a great space for whispers to come in. The problem is meditation can only have that effect if you are already trained to not have obsessive and compulsive thoughts. Otherwise, your mind is going to take advantage of that 20-minute space to flood you with information. So what I'm saying in this chapter is, okay, we're going to go all the way to meditation, but step by step. And there are easier things than meditation itself.
Like what?
Like trying to be present, like have a walk in nature and use all what nature has to offer to you to have little moments of presence, because presence is a time where you don't think. It's a time where, for example, you observe a sunset, and maybe for the first few seconds, it's only the sunset that is so beautiful that you are fully enjoying it. And then after 3 seconds, you will think about taking a picture of it and what kind of Instagram post you can make out of this great sunset. So maybe it's using these 2 seconds and making them 5 before you take off your phone. So what I usually recommend as a first step is go to nature. Don't take your phone with you. If you want to take your phone with you because you don't want to miss a great picture, or you don't want to miss being able to call people if you get into any awkward situation, then just switch it off. But really switch off, not silence. You switch off so that it requires a special effort to switch it on again. And then no music, that's very important. You can practice presence through music, but it's another thing. You just listen to music and you don't do anything else. So if you go into nature, don't take any music, because this is going to cut you from that connection. And then, I don't know, try to connect to noises like a bird singing. Try to connect to beauty. I mean, there is a lot of beauty in nature. Leaves, the ray of lights coming into the trees. There could be a sunset. There could be a nice cloud. There could be... Then try to connect also to sound, as we said, bird song, but there's also wind and other things. And you can also connect to smell. If you go in spring, there could be all kind of, or in fall or whatever, even in winter with the snow and everything, there can be all kind of smell. And just use your senses to connect to that. And you'll see, you do a walk like this. You don't have to do it for long, because after a while it becomes tedious, but do 5-10 minutes like this, and you'll see your level of presence will be very, very important.
I think something that comes up for me there is mindfulness is often mistaken. People assume that it means you do everything slowly, but it doesn't. It means you do things fully. And I think that's what we don't give ourselves permission to do. Busy multitasking, we're experiencing a few things at the same time, but then by doing that, we don't experience anything in its entirety. Mm-hmm. And it's like when you mentioned the ray of sunlight, those little moments, unless there's a real strong moment of awe, that comes in from something magnificent, that immediately snaps us out of that thinking mind, ruminating on the past, projecting into the future, contemplating our to-do list or what we're going to cook for dinner, whatever. We generally don't do it. We don't have those moments, but it's actually just being there. How can I soak up this experience fully?
Fully, yeah, exactly. And I think the easiest thing is in nature. That's why I recommend it to do it in nature, because I think nature helps us. Also, like if you go and swim in the ocean, there is a power that helps you connect. So it's much easier in nature than if you are just in your room or in your office or whatever. Yeah. So that's the first step. The second step is exactly what you said, which is do everything you do fully. So like you are at work and you have to do, a one-to-one discussion. Do it fully. Be present, fully present with that person. Do a 45 minutes discussion. Only in connection with that person, and you'll see how it changes things. It changes how you feel. You'll feel much less anxious, but it'll also change how good you will respond to, I don't know, if that person comes with an issue that needs to be solved, or they have a personal difficulty and want your help, whatever. You will, maybe not the first time you do it, but with just a little bit of practice, you're going to see the difference in the outcome. And that's wonderful. And that will make you less anxious, and that's going to space out your thoughts. And it's going to make you better, because just by doing this, by being fully with that person, you will be in a state where maybe subconsciously, but you will listen more to the whisper of the wider field of consciousness. And then suddenly it will completely change the way you do things, be it at work, but also if you have kids. I don't know, take 40 minutes per day or 20 minutes. It could be bedtime story or whatever, where you don't scroll your phone, you don't think about your to-do list, you don't think about what you're going to do after putting your kid to bed. You just be with them, and you'll see also how the relationship can change, because there will be this intuitive side of both of you that will be triggered in that.
Completely. I think about that so much with my son. It's really hard to do in practice, but I so notice just in his behavior that if I am fully with him, there are like no behavioral issues. No. I think that's a weird thing. Yeah. It's hard to do always in practice when you are trying to juggle, but I have noticed that when I try and divide my time and say like, okay, I'm going to do this 1 hour work task and he will do something else, but then the next half an hour I'm fully playing, the day is just so different.
It is, yes. It is, and it's so much more efficient. You might seem slow to other people because you do one thing at a time. So it's weird because we are in a society where we usually do at least 3 things at the same time.
Yeah,
at once. Huh?
Yeah.
I mean, you're cooking at the same time. You look at your Instagram when you have 5 minutes because I don't know your vegetables are cooking, and you put some music on, and you even chat with someone else. So at that time you're doing 4 things at a time. I'm not saying stop that, because it's also fun to be multitasking, but have moments where you don't do it. Yeah. Have moments where you only focus on one thing.
Yeah. And let go of the belief that makes you more efficient too, because we now know through a multitude of studies that it's actually a total fallacy that multitasking makes you more productive. You're just task switching. You're not doing something fully. And that brings the anxiety as well.
Didn't you tell me when you first saw me writing that you thought I was kind of...
Oh my God, everyone, I thought he was so slow, pissed me the heck off. And then I realized, like, do you know what? I'm smirking as you're telling that story because I'm thinking of all the dumb shit that I've done because I haven't been present, because I'm basically living in my mind. Like, remember that time when I drove into the garage? Oh gosh. And we had a ski rack on the top of the car. And I forgot about that, you know, and I was there busy contemplating, thinking about the things I want to do, and I want to be efficient and go fast, and I'm going to do blah, blah, blah. And then in the process of doing so, we have a garage remote in the center of the car and one in the letterbox outside. Hope no one lives near us. Now that I'm showing
this. Do you want to give us our address as well?
Oops. So then I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to be more efficient now if I press to close the garage while I'm still in, and then I can quickly get out of the garage. But instead I didn't, and I drove through it while the door was driving down and ripped off the top of our car. I'm not even joking. So yes, I could learn a thing or two. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true, and it's true, and you were right thinking that I was slow because I was really focusing on one thing, writing, and I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do any multitask. And then you were surprised that one day I told you it's over. My novel is finished. I've written 500 pages.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it is. You might surprise people, or people might even see you a little bit weird if you do one thing at a time. But they are going to notice a huge difference in your efficiency and in your creativity as well.
Powerful. So this brings us on to the last part, which is, we've spoken about it a lot already, about our kind of new listening, what it is to listen to our intuition, to connect with that wider field of consciousness. And I want you to break down a couple of these points, David.
Well, I think that's really the third step into receiving your intuition, or into at least using your intuition, because receiving it's something, but doing something out of it is another level. And I see that frequently, that people receive the intuition, like my friend, this story about the car,
Yeah.
but they don't trust it, they don't act on it. And then it's kind of lost, which is a shame because it's already quite difficult to get them. So if when you get them, you don't use them, it's a waste. And so this last thing is really, how do I act on this intuition? And of course, one of the critical point is, yes, but what if this is just a stupid thought? So,
yeah,
like when I received the intuition of writing a novel, it could have been a trick of my mind as well. I mean, we know that our mind is really good at tricking us in many things. So I could maybe just lose a lot of time writing a novel that will never be published. Or so there is genuine concern about first recognizing that it's a whisper from the wider field of consciousness and not a product, another, I don't know, the 30,001 produce of our brain today, because why acting on it if it's just a random thought? So in my book, I also describe, and I think something I would like to share here is that because this information comes from outside, not only our brain receives it. In reality, we know, I'm not going to detail that because it could be the subject of a whole podcast about how we receive this information, but we know that it's something, it has to be done between how synapses connect between each other. And the synapses are something that we have in our neurons. And we know that the places where we have the most neurons is the brain, obviously. But then there is two other places where we have a lot of neuronal activities. It's our belly, everything that is
our gut.
Our gut, yes, around our gut, and our heart. Okay? So when you receive an intuition, you're going to receive it in these places mainly. So it's going to trigger something in these places. In your brain, it's going to trigger an image or a voice or an idea or whatever. But your brain is really the best receiver because it can turn this intuition into something. But at the same time, your brain is collaborating with your mind, which is generating 30,000 thoughts a day. So it's not the best tool to differentiate it. Whereas your belly and your heart, they won't be able to verbalize or to transform this information, but they will receive it. And what will be the effect? Gut feeling. That's why we call it gut feeling. So you can have tickle in your stomach area. You can have your heartbeat that goes faster. You can suddenly feel some joy, or to the contrary, some fear. That is
restriction, attention.
Exactly. You can have
goosebumps,
for example. I don't know if you want to tell the intuition you got in the train, but actually, that's exactly what happened.
Exactly. No, what comes up on that, people who've listened to the last couple of episodes I shared about the significance of ones for me, and how there's a whole story. We'll go back to that with the episode with Dr. Tom Myers. I can link it in the show notes. But leading on from that, something that also came up for me recently. So context, I started seeing these 111s in Bali when we were getting married in April. And I was like, that's unusual, right? It was like, showed you my phone. I kept on seeing it. This is just odd. Like there's something in it. But it gave me shivers. I felt like an openness in my body, not just something in my mind. I had then a whole scenario where I went on the train to Geneva from here for an interview and was thinking about public speaking workshops. And then I had a guy walk past me with Trust Your Instincts t-shirt, like literally walking straight past me. Again, another dose of goosebumps and a strong energy, that pull to act, just like you described before, David, with that pull to act with writing your book. Apart from you actually did something and I didn't, but we'll deal with that another time.
Well, let's come back just after this, because this is one of the advice I give.
Yes, it really is a key one, because I do want to finish on that with the idea of acting on something and how hard that can be for people who have a lot of fear or trauma or have lived in a survival state where they're more disconnected from their body. So you are going to live more in your mind and therefore not trust what is going on internally in your body. There's a whole variety of reasons. But I had another example of this when I was in London recently, because I was possibly going to stay with somebody, and I was unsure about whether I wanted to stay with them. And then what I did was I looked up on my phone how long it would take me to get to their house from where I currently was. And guess what? Lo and behold, it was 1 hour and 11 minutes door to door from where I was to their place. Of course, chills, they're coming up again. And it did happen, because in that moment, I was like, that is just weird. Like, I got that amount of time. And what I've learned to do in those moments is to ask myself, what was the thought I had immediately before? I think that's really a key one. What was I thinking about immediately before you have this sort of sign?
Yeah, because that was not a thought. It was an intuition.
Exactly. So for me, it was like, I thought to myself, I feel uncomfortable. I don't think I want to stay there, but I'm not sure. And then, of course, the mind produces all of its things. But in that moment, I decided, and it was probably one of the first times I did it, where I thought, you know what, I've really got to practice what I preach here. I don't know why I have that feeling. I feel a bit bad for my friend. I said that I'm going to go stay there. Now I feel a bit guilty. All of that came up, but I decided, you know what, I have no idea why I don't want to go there. Maybe it's a story like you just told with your friend in the car. Like, maybe something happens in the street and I'm only going to know about it when I regret it later. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to take out my courage and I'm going to act on it. And I think the hard thing in it is not knowing what could have been.
Yeah, well, that's if you listen to an intuition to avoid a problem, then
exactly.
you're not gonna know what the problem was unless I mean there are some cases, very very mediatic cases, usually when there's sadly like an accident or plane crash, for example. You start to see those stories of people who either had an intuition or even stronger than that, like they were supposed to take the plane, but they couldn't. The car broke down or something like that. So you usually hear this story, but most of the time, when you listen to an intuition that would have prevented, that is there to prevent you from a bad situation, like my friend with the car rubbed, you will not know that you have escaped. You're not going to know what you're going to escape. Anyway, but what I wanted to say about that, and it is very part of my method, is when you have an intuition, and if you can identify it through the trick that we just gave, the feeling that associated with it, act on it immediately. Quick decision making, like I did with this Eckhart Tolle retreat. I don't know, it was kind of an intuition. I called, I registered. Okay, if you're not used to do that, then write it down. Write, I should have done this, and you underline it. And then maybe you need 3 more days to ponder things, but always come back to what you have written. And maybe one day maybe you will not, like my friend, you will not listen to this intuition. You're going to be wrapped, and then you go back and say, okay, yeah, I should have done that. And just this little thing will help you make this quick decision when they need to be made. And there is a great book we both loved on the subject, which is of Michael Singer, about how he lived his life just following his intuition.
The surrender experiment.
The surrender experiment.
Life-changing.
Yeah. So if you want to know how to act on intuition, I would recommend this book.
Yeah,
it's amazing. I mean, Michael Singer lived his life following his intuition, quick decision making each time. And it's an uncommon life, but it's very fulfilling, and you can see that he's lived through his patience.
Yeah, and has had major success as well. I think that's what's significant, alongside still staying like spiritual and grounded and happy almost. But yeah.
And I would say even more so if it looks impossible to you, like writing a novel looked impossible for me. Yeah. I tried. In my book to come, I give the example, okay, if you have the intuition, you should go to the North Pole. And until now, you've only been in vacation always to the same place, very easy, you book from year to year and everything. And suddenly you have this intuition, I should go to the North Pole. Your brain is going to say the North Pole is only for adventurers. You are not going to set up an expedition. Well, in reality, if you take 5 minutes to Google, you're going to see that there is there's islands that are called Svalbards that are part of Norway, where you can fly, at least if you're a European, you can fly there for less than $200. And then you are very, very near the North Pole. So what seems impossible, I mean, an intuition go to the North Pole probably doesn't mean go exactly to that point, but you can probably do something very similar for a reasonable budget you've never thought of. So never categorize something as impossible. Try to find ways around when you have an intuition, because it's telling you something. Maybe it's not using the right, I mean, it's just an intuition. It's not like you have a friend telling you what to do. So the intuition is guidance. Use that guidance to then do your own search around it to find a way to make it happen.
Yeah, I love that, because I think it also very much links back to what we said earlier with our beliefs, and actually pulling back those beliefs and widening what we think is possible for us. And that could very well lead us to a life that we absolutely love, that we never would have dreamt up. But sometimes it takes that courage and that action. And I think that you also, David, have lived your life in a really, I find it even inspiring for me, you know, to see how you've listened to that, you've done this self-development work, and then you're daring also to take action to change your life and putting it into place. So
yeah, and that's what I think. That's why I think I'm legitimate to write this non-fiction book, because I have this theory frame understanding of consciousness, but at the same time, I also acted on it. And I must say that I am much happier writing novel than managing a company. It's much more into what passionate me.
Yeah. I'm going to move into the final fast few questions. David, what is something that you used to believe that you no longer believe?
Well, when I started my search about consciousness, I didn't know it was about consciousness, but I wanted to know a little bit more about the universe, the sense of life and everything. I really grew up in my teaching. So every course I had and every science book I read was very into what is called the materialistic science. So I could never have imagined that there is something else than matter in the universe. And it's only by experimenting these beliefs and testing them until the end, you know, with a lot of reading that included quantum physics and everything, that I suddenly could not believe that this was the case, because I saw so many evidence that the life and the universe and our world was much more complex than it is explained in materialistic science books. So that was a big shift, because suddenly I understood that consciousness is everywhere and it's linked to other things. And the strongest belief that comes out of that is that there is a part of you, that part of consciousness that is wider, that never dies.
Mm-hmm. That one is a whole nother question.
Yeah, it is. But I think you're going to have a great guest to speak about that soon. No?
Yes, I do. Dr. Eben Alexander. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with him, but he's coming on the podcast very soon. Second, David, what is a quote or affirmation that resonates with you that you'd like to share?
You're not what you think. Mm-hmm. And I think it summarizes what we say. I think a lot of our many thousand thoughts we have every day, they don't define us. They are the produce of our beliefs, and they don't define us. They are not who we are.
Love that. Last, what is a closing message that you want to give to people listening today about everything we've spoken about, you know, why, but really bringing it back to where we started, which is why self-development is more important now than ever?
I mean, artificial intelligence is happening. It's a fact. It's going to do things that only human could do before. But should that induce fear? It could, but it shouldn't. I think it's an opportunity. It's a real opportunity for us to tap into something a bit different. I think we have been in excess to our mind. We have lived in excess inside our minds. We've worked in excess using only our minds. And maybe the happening of artificial intelligence is a very, very positive sign, because it's going to push us to rebalance. We are unbalanced where we are only in our minds. So if someone is going to challenge us as a mind-geared human, I think it's the right time to go a little bit more into the middle, where we use our mind, we use that wider field of consciousness. And I think this is also what is going to make us more conscious. And we're going to be able to solve problems not only at an individual level, but also at a societal level. And that is really needed when we see, for example, the exhaustion of the resource of our planet. That's a big problem that needs a solution. And I think that solution exists in this wider field of collective consciousness.
Yeah, exactly. So let's, to use that old famous quote, let's be the change we wish to see in the world.
It boils down to that. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Gandhi had it all right when he said that. He understood it.
Yeah. Thanks so much, honey.
Thanks, Madam.